Good morning. My name's Nina Ellis, Dr. Nina Ellis, and I am a professor of English, creative writing and comparative literature here at a university in Egypt. Last week, two of you asked me what the path to my PhD was and how I went about getting a full scholarship for my PhD research. So I thought I'd talk a bit about that this week. First of all, I really want everyone to understand how unlikely it seemed to me when I graduated from my undergrad degree that I would ever return to university. I studied archaeology and anthropology at Cambridge for my undergrad, and I really enjoyed it, but I did not do very well. I got a low 2-1, which I think is roughly in American terms equivalent to a sort of mid-ish, maybe low-ish 3-point-something GPA, so not a future PhD student grade. When I left university, I moved to New York and got started in the publishing industry and ended up working as a junior literary agent for an amazing agency called the Wiley Agency. And I thought that would be my life. But while I was at the Wiley Agency, I came to realize that I didn't want to be an agent, I wanted to be a writer. And that's when I started writing in earnest. The problem with working in publishing is that you spend all your time reading other people's work and you often have very little time left for your own. So at that point, I decided to quit my job in publishing and just work as a server, a waitress, in an all-night restaurant in Union Square. I can tell you about that in a future video. I won't go into detail here, but suffice it to say that working as a server is obviously exhausting, and even though it may seem like a glamorous New York writer's life, I would not recommend. You need job security, and you need time to write and time to sleep, and you need the knowledge that you're making enough money to get by. So I moved back to the UK and I trained as a teacher. I did this on a fully funded program called School Direct. I'm not sure if it still exists, I think maybe it does. You get placed in a school, often in a challenging neighbourhood, underserved socioeconomically, for example, and while you teach, you study 1 day a week. In the process, you gain your qualified teacher status and you have the option to continue to PGCE level. I did that, I became a teacher, I started writing seriously, and I taught English at this school, which is crucial. Even though my undergrad degree had been in archaeology and anthropology, obviously they don't teach that in secondary schools, and so the closest thing that we could find to my specialism was English, and that's how I ended up teaching English. While teaching English at this wonderful school in East London called St. Paul's Way, which I'm still very fond of, I really fell in love with it as a subject, and I was also writing short stories, so I was engaging with literature, I was going to literary events, I was engaging with other writers, and it was becoming my life. Eventually I decided that I'd really like to do a master's in English, just so that I could have a bit more authority as an English teacher. I knew that I couldn't afford to just stop working altogether to do this master's, but luckily this wonderful school where I was teaching let me go super part-time. So 2 days a week teaching years 7, 8 and 9, quite easy syllabi, which I'd taught before. And while working part-time, I did my master's at UCL in English full-time. And I was really stunned to even get into UCL because obviously my undergrad degree from Cambridge was not great. But I think the fact that I'd been publishing short stories in the meantime helped to strengthen my case. Once I got to UCL, I was so happy. I did the Issues in Modern Culture course, which is essentially Anglophone literature post-1800-ish. And I did a wonderful module on Marxist aesthetics, another wonderful module on the American counterculture, and I decided to write my master's dissertation about this writer I'd fallen in love with after discovering her posthumous collection of short stories on a staff picks table in City Lights Books in San Francisco, where I was visiting my grandmother, Lucia Berlin, who I'm now writing a biography of. Because no one else had ever written about Lucia Berlin before, I ended up reaching out to her sons and to many of her friends and interviewing them for my master's thesis. And I really went overboard on this. I think because I hadn't done well in my undergrad, I really felt like I had to prove myself with my master's. I had no intention of doing a PhD, but I just wanted to make the most of it and I wanted to do well. And the fact that I was still teaching in this school 2 days a week meant that every moment was precious. I would go to the British Library after I finished teaching on Mondays and Tuesdays and work there until it closed at 8. And then on Wednesdays, Thursdays and Fridays, I just spent every waking hour on the reading for the UCL course. I loved it. My professors were wonderful and I had the best time. Anyway, long story short, I did surprisingly well in my master's. I got the highest distinction in my year, which is the top grade you can get for a master's in the UK. And I was so proud because I tried hard at undergrad and I hadn't done that well. And now I had done well, and I figured that it was because I'd found the right subject. And I also sort of felt like Lucia Berlin was from beyond the grave cheering me on. And the supervisor for my master's dissertation was this wonderful academic called Professor Matthew Beaumont, who encouraged me after I'd delivered the thesis and got that very high grade to consider PhDs. And he connected me with a former colleague of his, the extraordinary Professor Kasia Boddy at Cambridge, who's a specialist on the American short story. I reached out to her and she talked me through the Cambridge applications process for PhDs. I knew I couldn't afford to do a PhD without full funding, so it was really important to me to understand options for scholarships. Next week, I'll tell you about the different options for PhD scholarships, but I hope this story of my journey to PhD applications, in which I was ultimately successful and I did get a full scholarship, has encouraged you. I'm not the typical PhD student. I mean, now I'm a professor. And I did so badly in my undergrad. I mean, not badly, but it was pretty mediocre. So if I can do it, I really think you can do it too. And perhaps the key is finding a subject you're really passionate about, which is really original, like Lucia Berlin, or maybe you were just doing the wrong subject. I loved anthropology, but maybe that just wasn't my subject. I mean, it clearly wasn't. English was, and I probably should have done that from the start, but I found my way there at the end. So you see, life is strange, and you can end up in places you don't expect. And in my heart, I still feel like I'm fundamentally a secondary school teacher, even though I'm teaching university. That will always stay with me, and so will the kindness and the support of Professor Matthew Beaumont at UCL and of Professor Kasia Boddy at Cambridge, who I will tell you about next week. In the meantime, you can follow me on TikTok, on Instagram. You can sign up to my Substack, which is lookingforlucia@substack.com, I think. Or you can just check out my website to see the sorts of things I write. See you next week. Bye.